the paranormal. For as long as we've known it, it still confounds us. We all remember the days of our youth, when we were fear-struck by what we thought were our earliest encounters with the supernatural realm. Tales of ghosts, ghouls, poltergeists, and wandering souls were ingrained in our minds and led us to believe there really were spirits communicating from a far dimension. Hell, some of us still swear we've had spirit sightings of our own as a child, and yet everyone else labeled it as nothing more than crying wolf. There is no doubt typical hauntings can easily be accounted for, and as people grow older, they realize much of the paranormal is merely a byproduct of adolescent fantasy. However, every now and then, we may encounter preternatural happenings which remind us of how everything may not be as it seems. Even in the present day, there are countless examples of what is believed to be paranormal activity, curses, and sightings around the world. Skeptics call it a mystery. Believers call it evidence. But regardless, the presence of a mystifying force is undeniable. From some of the most infamous hauntings in history to obscure cases with inconceivable backstories, this iceberg serves as a deep dive into the world of the paranormal. So, sit back, turn off the lights, and allow yourself to succumb to the darkness. Robert the Doll is undoubtedly one of the most infamous allegedly haunted dolls in all of history. Manufactured by hand over 120 years ago by workers from the Steiff Company in Germany, Robert's beginnings took place in the now notorious Artist House located in Key West, Florida, where the wealthy Otto family resided, and a young boy named Eugene Robert Otto was gifted Robert. Otto quickly bonded with the doll in the sailor suit and treated it how any boy would treat his favorite toy. But it wasn't long before strange happenings took place in the days following Robert's arrival. Since he was as young as 10 years old, Otto would reportedly wake up to Robert staring at him from the end of his bed, despite never placing the doll there himself. According to legend, Otto's parents were constantly awoken by the sounds of furniture being destroyed by a force significantly stronger than a young boy. Upon checking on Otto, his parents often found him curled up out of fear with tears rolling down his cheeks, only able to utter the words, "Robert did it." For as long as Robert was present in the Otto household, these occurrences only grew more reckless. While the family failed to comprehend how this mysterious activity was entirely at the hands of an otherwise innocuous doll, Robert haunted Otto until he eventually passed away in 1974. From there, the 10-year-old daughter of the Eaton Street's home's new owners rediscovered the doll in the attic, and the inexplicable communicating and midnight terrors took place all over again. Legend has it that Robert was possessed by the same individual who gifted him to Otto over a century ago, a female servant who was exploited by her bosses and cursed the doll with black magic as revenge. Today, Robert is on display at the Fort East Martello Museum in Florida, where visitors are constantly warned to remain respectful and ask Robert for consent before taking his photo. Many say failing to oblige will result in a visitor experiencing hauntings of their own, though whether or not their claims are authentic is for you to decide. Robert is essentially never active during public hours, but over the years, numerous staff members have reported hearing demonic giggles from his exhibition, changes in his facial expression, and on some rare instances, Robert placing his hand up to the glass box, eager to be freed. The Hands Resist Him is a painting done by American artist William Stoneham in 1972, said to serve as a metaphor for the border between reality and fantasy. The artwork depicts a 5-year-old boy and a young female doll standing in front of a window where several ominous hands push upon the glass from a void of black. Stoneham has stated the boy represents himself at 5 years old, who is guided by the accompanying familiarity of the doll through the uncertainties of reality, with each hand symbolizing every potential life the boy could choose to live. Though the painting appears menacious on the surface, its message is ultimately grounded, but the artwork has since gained notoriety in the paranormal realm, largely thanks to an eBay auction from 2000. It was in February of the year when a seller listed the painting after it was rediscovered at an old brewery in California and later claimed the artwork was cursed in the auction's description. The user stated the characters in the painting would move positions or leave the artwork altogether, and in one instance, the female doll was once seen wielding a gun and pointing it towards the boy. Given the auction took place during the internet's earliest years, the listing took online spheres by storm and allowed for other users to expand upon its paranormal lore. The painting was ultimately sold for $1,025 to the Perception Gallery in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Officials from the gallery eventually got in contact with Stoneham himself and informed him of his work's virality, to which he was quite surprised by, and even had some preternatural stories of his own involving the painting. The Hands Resist Him is part of Stoneham's Hands series, a collection of artworks he has added to as recently as in 2021. Anyone intrigued by the paranormal in the slightest knows of Ouija boards, the whimsical talking boards which supposedly allow direct communication with undead spirits. The first ever Ouija board was manufactured in Baltimore, Maryland by Elijah Bond and Charles Kenner in 1890, and almost as quickly as it came into existence, newspaper coverage spread about its usage as a vessel for talkative spirits, as well as a way to predict upcoming events or solve year-old mysteries. One of the earliest and most well-known cases revolving around the Ouija board is of Pearl Curran, a woman from St. Louis, Missouri who supposedly contacted the spirit of a 17th century author named Patience Worth via an Ouija board in 1915, and continued communicating with her in the years since. The Ouija board game itself has had its rights purchased by American investor William Fuld in 1891. Close to a century later, Fuld's company was purchased by Parker Brothers in 1966 before they ultimately merged with Hasbro, thus making the beloved children's toy company the current owners of the rights to the Ouija board game. These days you won't see many people take the Ouija board seriously, but the game still has its very fair share of reportedly supernatural occurrences to take place in its storied lifespan. An essential viewing for any avid paranormal enthusiast is the 2013 horror film The Conjuring, a modern-day classic which has scared countless viewers to their core. The hauntings which took place within were not entirely fabricated, but loosely based on the real supernatural accounts of the Perron family, all of which allegedly took place in what has since been deemed the most haunted house in America. The Conjuring House, a 14-room farmhouse built in 1736. The property, located in the countryside of Harrisville, Rhode Island, was home to Carolyn and Roger Perron as well as their 5 daughters, who moved into the humble abode in 1970 and lived there for a decade. Almost as soon as the family arrived, several members supposedly witnessed just about every textbook paranormal sign, and eventually learned the history of their home was much more grim than they could have ever imagined. When the Perrons had enough of the inexplicable noises, the stench of rotten flesh, and the sudden appearances of dirt on their floor, Carolyn felt inclined to research the home's background. And according to her eldest daughter, Andrea, they discovered the household's lifespan was highlighted by death and tragedy. Supposedly, more than a dozen deaths and disappearances have taken place within the perimeters of the property, with some of the most notable being a series of drownings in a nearby lake, a hanging in the home's attic, and the murders of 2 children. It was not long after these revelations when the Perrons reached out to the aforementioned paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren in a desperate search for answers, whose interactions with the family were also detailed in The Conjuring. Further research done by Carolyn supposedly led her to the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman, who, according to the mother, indeed lived in the home during the 1800s, had murdered her own child, and frequently practiced witchcraft. For years, the Perrons allegedly dealt with demonic possessions, paranormal activity, and violent attacks from spirits, all of which was documented by both the Warrens and Andrea's own writings. The Perrons ultimately moved out of the house in 1980, and fittingly, the hauntings soon passed. One of, if not the most frequently used tool by modern paranormal investigators, a spirit box, is a handheld communication device supposedly utilized to connect with spirits by detecting electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs for short. A spirit box is able to formulate coherent words and sentences by constantly cycling through numerous radio frequencies in a similar manner to a car radio, which ghosts tend to use as a vessel to communicate through. This scanning is widespread, repeatedly covering both AM and FM stations as opposed to just one, and only ever pauses on a sole station when a message sent by a spirit is received. Investigators will receive few intelligible replies from a spirit box, but if they remain polite, coherent, and attentive, they could hold brief conversations with what they believe to be a ghost. Aside from its use for communication, most spirit boxes can also record and save EVPs, serve as a flashlight, and detect changes in temperature at a location. To skeptics, spirit boxes are nothing more than theatrical props, using miscellaneous voices and static to unnerve users. Whichever purpose is the most authentic, however, is again for you to decide. The Smurl family, who resided within a duplex in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, moved into their household in 1974, intending to repair the worn-out home and live a simple, quiet life. However, they had unknowingly set foot in a hotspot for vicious paranormal activity. Living in the duplex were partners Janet and Jack Smurl, their daughters, and Jack's parents, all of whom allegedly experienced a series of eerie episodes during their 13-year stay. At first, the activity was tame. Tools would go missing, strange scents surrounded the home, and faint whispers were supposedly heard. But at the same time the Smurls were struggling financially, the paranormal encounters only intensified. Janet claimed she was once picked up and tossed across a room by an invisible force. The family dog was once thrown against the wall. And Jack went as far as to say a succubus suddenly entered their living room and sexually assaulted him as he was watching TV. When the evil grew too overwhelming for the Smurls, they contacted none other than the Warrens to inspect the premises for any demons present. After practicing her regular rituals, Lorraine eventually informed the Smurls that they were living with a total of 4 spirits. One of an innocent elderly woman, one of a young yet harsh girl, one of a tormented man who passed away in their home, and finally, a demon who was manipulating the other 3 spirits to ruin the lives of the Smurl family. The hauntings ceased when the Smurl family moved to Wilkes-Barre in 1987, but their previous residence remains one of the most popular paranormal destinations in America, and their accounts are some of the most harrowing in recent memory. The Smurl hauntings are also the direct source material for the upcoming Conjuring film Last Rites. In the vast hallways of the 400-year-old Raynham Hall in Norfolk, England, supposedly lives the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall, the ghost of a 17th century aristocrat who has bewildered tourists and scholars alike. Legend has it that the Brown Lady is Dorothy Walpole, a woman who was well known among British politicians, and the second wife of the second Viscount Townshend, Charles Townshend. During their marriage, Townshend supposedly learned Walpole had cheated on him, and punished her by locking her inside her room within the Raynham Hall for good. Walpole would never see the light of day again, ultimately passing away from smallpox in 1726. In the century since, there have been countless alleged sightings of Walpole and reports of supernatural activity taking place in the country house, with some of the most common occurrences being knocking on doors, hallucinations of a female figure in a brown dress, and countless sightings of ghostly orbs. The most infamous piece of evidence of the Brown Lady's presence is this alleged photograph of her taken in 1936 by Captain Hubert C. Provand, showing a blurred white figure standing over a staircase in the hall. The photograph is undoubtedly one of the most recognized in the world of the paranormal, but it has since been debunked as fabricated by numerous experts, with the figure likely being the product of a double exposure of an artwork of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. What many casual visitors may not know about eBay is how there is a whole section of the website which exclusively sells allegedly haunted dolls. Most dolls being pre-owned, they typically vary in price. Some go for as little as just $10, while others are in the thousands. As you scroll through the listings, you'll see how just about every single doll has its own brief description, which states the age, occupation, and state of activity of the spirit possessing them, as if they were actual humans. Mallory, for example, is a 13-year-old girl in a Girl Scouts club and is selling for $15 as of the recording of this video. Other descriptions have also stated their dolls can turn on TVs and open purses, and the listings occasionally come with very unconvincing videos. Now, are these supposed hauntings likely just false advertising for dolls with no real paranormal background? Yeah. However, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a genuine community of collectors on eBay who search for and purchase these dolls. Maybe some are aware and buy them anyways out of their love for dolls themselves, while others dig deeper and search for the more sinister, authentically haunted dolls for their collection. And Lord knows eBay certainly has a few of those on stock. Located at 8435 Roanoke Drive in Belle Noire, Missouri, the Exorcist House is the very site where the infamous exorcism of Roland Doe took place, an event which became the direct source material for William Blatty's 1971 novel The Exorcist, and eventually the classic horror film of the same name. Born in 1935, Roland Doe, whose real name was Ronald Hunkeler, was raised by German-born Lutheran parents in Maryland and was especially close with his Aunt Harriet, a spiritualist who introduced him to the occult through a Ouija board at a very young age. Doe's childhood was far from ordinary, and when he was 14, he and his family supposedly experienced some of the most bewildering paranormal activity of their time. According to several accounts, dripping and scratching noises were frequently heard, and a painting of Jesus Christ would always be seen shaking when nothing else in the house was. When Aunt Harriet passed away, Doe believed it was possible to contact her in the afterlife through his gifted Ouija board, But instead of doing this, he had unknowingly allowed a poltergeist to possess his body. From there, the hauntings only grew more violent and occasionally resulted in scratches appearing on Doe's body. When medical and psychiatric doctors were no help, the family moved to the ill-famed Roanoke Drive home, where the poltergeist followed, and turned towards two local Catholic priests to perform an exorcism. Following several past others, this final exorcism would be one of the most violent yet, with reports stating as it happened, the entire room viciously shook. Doe began speaking in a devilish voice, and one of the priests even had their nose broken by Doe. Legend has it, Doe went on to live a quieter life, following years of sinister hauntings. But the Roanoke Drive home itself is still as notorious today as it was close to a century ago, though now privately owned. Reports of paranormal activity still arise, and the home is a popular attraction for paranormal enthusiasts around the world. Waverly Hills is the name of an abandoned sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky, which is said to be one of the most haunted locations in the country. First opening in 1926, the Waverly Hills Sanatorium primarily treated patients suffering from the White Plague, an outbreak of tuberculosis which ravaged both the United States and Europe during the 19th and 20th centuries. At the time, there was no known cure for the plague, and although Waverly Hills was considered to be the most technologically advanced tuberculosis sanatorium, it still claimed the lives of a majority of patients due to a lack of medicine. It was not only disease which affected patients, however, as failed surgeries, patient mistreatment, and isolation from the outside world often led to damning repercussions. Based on death certificates, roughly 6,000 people died in the building from the time it first opened to when it was indefinitely shut down in 1982. But though treatment ended, paranormal activity within those same desolate walls had begun. In the decades it has served as a hotspot for supernatural occurrences. There have been countless reports of slamming doors, lights turning on and off on their own, and footsteps being heard in empty hallways. Visitors have experienced what they believe to be visions of ghostly children, as well as a woman with bleeding wrists. And maybe the most infamous legend in all of Waverly Hills stems from room 502, where several patients have allegedly committed and where their spirits dwell in sorrow to this day. Currently, Waverly Hills is a tourist attraction which hosts thousands of tours per year. Its ghastly history still intriguing historians and enthusiasts alike. The Anguished Man is an ill-famed painting published in an unknown year by an unknown artist. The artwork, depicting a fleshy red figure in agony with gaping black holes for eyes and a mouth, is shrouded in anonymity, with the only known information about it coming from its current owner, a Cumbria, England native named Sean Robinson. Robinson, who has stated the painting was inherited from his grandmother, claims the Anguished Man has a gruesome backstory and is now haunted by ominous spirits. According to Robinson's grandmother, the painting's original artist mixed drops of his own blood into his work and committed shortly following its completion. Robinson himself is a skeptic turned believer, and it is all thanks to several instances of paranormal activity he has experienced with the painting in his home. As stated in several self-released YouTube videos documenting the artwork, Robinson has frequently heard crying and moaning noises throughout his home, and once spotted the figure of a man eerily similar in appearance to the one in The Anguished Man. I am a believer now. There is definitely something wrong with that painting. The fact that he used his own blood. It might be that it was some sort of ritual. I believe it may be a self-portrait. Believing it to be cursed Robinson has vowed never to sell the painting, and it currently resides in an unknown yet secure location today. Anna Baker's wedding dress refers to a 19th century gown once owned by a young lady named Anna Baker and is now displayed at the Baker Mansion in Altoona, Pennsylvania, gaining traction for its accompanying paranormal history. The daughter of a high-class ironmaster named Elias Baker, Anna was raised in the Baker Mansion and was surrounded by wealth her entire life. As she grew older, Anna fell in love with an unnamed working-class man, though their bond was strong. Their love was forbidden by Anna's father due to the suitor's lower status. As a result, Anna lived out the rest of her life, bitter, lonesome, and unmarried, ultimately passing away in 1914. Before their engagement was broken, Anna had purchased a wedding dress for her planned marriage with the man, but in the century since, it has never been worn. Anna's dress has resided in the Baker Mansion as a museum exhibit long after her death, and it has been associated with a string of alleged hauntings over the years. Visitors have claimed the dress can move on its own and shift as if a person is trying it on, and there have been reports of faint sobbing being heard in the room where the gown is located. Skeptics firmly believe this paranormal activity stems from natural causes, but thanks to its many believers, the local legend persists, and it is said Anna's spirit is still attached to her wedding dress, eternally yearning for a romance that never was. One of Hollywood's most influential actors of the 50s, James Dean's career was notably cut short when he was involved in a fatal car accident months after he purchased a Porsche 550 Spider nicknamed Little Bastard. On September 30th, 1955, Dean, a well-known auto racer, was en route to another sports car racing competition, with the Porsche's mechanic Rolf Weatherick on the passenger side. Little Bastard was meant to be towed to the race instead of driven, but Weatherick insisted it would be good for Dean to grow comfortable with his sports car, and the actor himself agreed. Police had already pulled Little Bastard over and issued Dean a speeding ticket at the time, but he never slowed down. As Dean drove down State Route 46 at 55 miles per hour, a local student named Donald Turnipseed made a sudden turn onto Route 41. Unable to adjust in time, the two vehicles collided head-on, ejecting Weatherick from the Porsche and sending Turnipseed's Ford Tudor 40 feet down the road. Though Turnipseed and Weatherick ultimately survived, Dean himself was pronounced dead at the scene, and suffice to say, Little Bastard was totaled. Since then, locals have believed Little Bastard to be cursed by Dean's spirits, given several eerie coincidences and inexplicable occurrences. A man named William Eschrick had implemented Little Bastard's engine on his Lotus 9 race car and gifted other parts to racer Troy McHenry for the 1956 Pomona sports car race. Both would ultimately crash during this race, with Eschrich surviving and McHenry being killed following a collision with a tree. There have also been reports of Little Bastard mysteriously catching on fire in later years. It was the only car in its proximity to ever ignite, and its parts have been considered obsolete ever since. Eerily, the current location of Little Bastard has remained unknown for over 60 years now, and some believe the infamous Porsche may no longer even exist today. Located northwest of Mount Fuji on the Japanese island of Honshu, the Akodigahara Forest, better known in popular culture as the Forest, is notorious for being considered one of, if not the most popular site for in Japan, an occurrence which has frequently taken place in the forest for at least 60 years. Though it is said Ubasude, A Japanese practice involving sinicide may have occurred within its woods during the 19th century. Authorities began officially recording deaths starting in the 1960s, and since then, roughly 30 people commit in the Akodigahara annually. In 2003 alone, 105 bodies were found by police in the Akodigahara, a majority of which were hanging from branches above. Specific reasons for in the forest vary. As previously mentioned, however, the natural site itself is close to Mount Fuji, a sacred mountain in spiritual realms, and local legends claim the yurei of those who have died still dwell within the forest to this day. If you visit today, and please do so with respect, you will see countless cautionary signs meant to discourage suicidal visitors and urge them to contact any suicide prevention association instead of following through. Beneath the grounds of Paris, France, lie the historical and ever uncanny Paris Catacombs, a series of underground ossuaries which stretch roughly 175 miles in total and hold the remains of over 6 million people. The history of these catacombs dates back as early as the Roman ages, and they have been prominently utilized during periods of the 18th century and World War II. Under the orders of the Parlement of Paris, hundreds of bodies were exhumed from the Holy Innocents' Cemetery starting in December of 1785. What was then the Paris Municipal Ossuary served as a more sanitary resting place for these corpses, and with bodies only continuing to pile following mass casualty events such as the Reign of Terror, the White Plague, and both World Wars. The bones of millions were used by workers to form walls, tunnels, and archways within the catacombs. Listen, anyone who's seen As Above So Below already knows shit can go down in here. But in all seriousness, people are frightened less by any alleged reports of paranormal activity within the site, and more by its ominous atmosphere and sinister lore. Most supernatural legends revolve around several people who have gone missing within the catacombs' halls, and the only recorded death was of a doorkeeper named Philibert Asbert, whose body was discovered 11 years after he went missing in 1793. Only a small portion of this labyrinth of tunnels is open to the public. Whatever presence lies beyond these limits is only for the most daring to explore. Man proposes, God disposes, named after a Latin phrase from the 15th century devotional book, The Imitation of Christ, is an artwork created by English painter Sir Edwin Landseer in 1864. The painting, which depicts two polar bears scavenging disjecta membra in the Arctic, was inspired by Franklin's lost expedition of 1845. A voyage which saw Captain Sir John Franklin, along with a combined crew of 134 men, leave England for the Northwest Passage on the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, only to never be seen again. The painting itself is a grim illustration of what may have been the aftermath of this incident, and in the centuries since its publication, it has become the subject of an urban legend among the English for being allegedly cursed. More specifically, students at the University of London's Royal Holloway claim anyone who sits in front of the painting during an exam would fail it. A legend which has been prevalent since as early as the 1920s. Even today, the painting is temporarily covered with a Union Jack when students take exams, out of years of superstition. There have also been rumors of a student who committed after looking at the painting, but there is zero official evidence for this. One of the 7 wonders of the world. The Great Wall of China is universally acknowledged as one of mankind's greatest architectural accomplishments. Although millions of tourists visit every year, the superstitious tread with more caution than most, given the historical sites, rumors of paranormal activity within the area. To understand where this superstition stems from requires one to fully grasp the centuries of work, sacrifice, and death, which took place during the Great Wall's construction. Based on estimations from various historical reports, somewhere between 400,000 to 1 million workers have died building the Great Wall since the work first began during the 7th century BCE, whether as a result of decades of expansion, worker exploitation, or fatal workplace accidents. People often say there are dead bodies within the Great Wall, which can not only be interpreted as an expression encapsulating the human suffering under tyrannical Chinese emperors, but also as a more literal statement of their lingering presence from beyond the grave. Some say they have seen ghostly figures, heard faint whispers, or felt sudden changes in temperature during their visit to the Long Wall. Located in the Irish town of Blarney, the Blarney Stone is a famed tourist attraction situated at the peak of the ancient Blarney Castle. Millions of people from around the globe visit the site with one sensual goal in mind: to ascend to the top of the castle and kiss the stone. For centuries, it has been believed kissing the Blarney Stone blesses the kisser with the gift of the gab, which is described as immense skills in flattery and eloquent speech. In modern times, this sort of ritual is performed by reaching the castle's peak, lying down and leaning stomach first on the parapet's edge, and then kissing the stone while upside down. An atypical yet safer method than when the site had no safeguards during the 19th century. There are various stories which claim to detail the true origins of the Blarney Stone legend. One involves a 15th century man named Cormac Leiter McCarthy being ordered by the mythological goddess Cleona to kiss the stone in order to win a lawsuit. And another states Cormac McDermott McCarthy, an Irish magnate, kissed the stone himself and used the gift of the gab to successfully persuade Queen Elizabeth I not to revoke his traditional land rights, the site being esteemed for possessing supernatural powers ever since. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, in what has aged to become one of the most unforgettable moments in American history. Of course, Kennedy's last ride was in a 1961 Lincoln Continental limousine, a vehicle which was kept in presidential service for years following his death, and is now the subject of numerous conspiracy theories, as well as alleged paranormal lore. Currently on display at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, the Lincoln Continental has gained a reputation for being the site of an unknown supernatural presence. Among reports of an ominous atmosphere and significant temperature changes, numerous visitors have claimed to witness the infamous Gray Man guarding the vehicle, a spectral silhouette who is most frequently sighted during the anniversary month of Kennedy's death. A considerable number of locals attribute this supposed paranormal activity to unusual lighting or over-exaggerations from museum officials or others to scare tourists. But the superstitious believe otherwise, and are convinced the Lincoln Continental is cursed by the spirit of Kennedy, still lingering on the museum grounds to this day. The Diplomat Hotel, now officially known as the Dominican Heritage Hill and Nature Park, is an abandoned building located in the Filipino city of Baguio with a disturbing paranormal history. Construction was completed in May of 1915, and the site was initially meant to serve as a vacation house for American friars of the Dominican order. In the decades to come, however, this retreat house would become infamous for being a location of bloodshed and war crimes committed by the Japanese military during World War II. As war broke out nearby, both locals and Japanese civilians sought refuge in the vacation home, but it was soon invaded by Imperial Japan's secret police force known as the Kempeitai. Japanese authorities went on to remorselessly torture the dozens present, and a structure meant to serve as a sanctuary soon became a site for human trafficking and numerous executions. Decades later, the building was revamped and operated as the Diplomat Hotel from the 1970s to the 80s. Though it has been abandoned since, the war-torn hotel is now the subject of ghastly folklore and several accounts of paranormal activity. Visitors have reported hearing distant screams, cries, and banging on walls, spotted spectral figures in photographs, and very rarely have witnessed what are described as headless spirits in the night. The murder trial of Connecticut native Arne Cheyenne Johnson is one of the most notorious in the paranormal sphere for being the first case in American history where the defendant pleaded guilty by reason of demonic possession. In 1981, a 19-year-old Johnson and his landlord, Alan Bono, were meeting up for drinks when he supposedly witnessed his future brother-in-law, then aged 12, fall under demonic possession. The boy gained unusual strength, began levitating on his own, and listed out the names of demons entirely in Latin. As local priests were called in to perform an exorcism, Johnson challenged the malevolent spirit to enter his body instead, and shortly after, he began acting in a fit of rage himself. Among other inexplicable occurrences, Johnson ended up stabbing Bono to death during his outburst. In several hearings, Johnson claimed he genuinely had no recollection of murdering his landlord, and the act was committed while he was under the devil's spell. Judges hadn't seen anything like it, and given a lack of a motive, as well as significant figures in paranormal and religious fields, attesting to the realities of demonic possessions, it seemed as though Johnson's statements weren't as invalid as they appeared on paper. Connecticut Supreme Court Judge Robert Callahan wished not to set any precedents, however, and Johnson was ultimately convicted of manslaughter and given a 10 to 20 year sentence. Because authorities deemed Johnson an exemplary inmate though, the young man only served 5 years of his sentence before being released. It was the shots that changed the course of history. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was with his wife and Duchess of Hohenberg, Sophie, as they were driven through Sarajevo in a Graf and Stift touring limo. The ride was already far from sound, as Ferdinand had narrowly avoided a bombing perpetrated by a group of Serbian nationalists, as the couple then made their way to a local hospital to visit those who were wounded. The limo stalled in front of a cafe as the driver attempted to reverse in the opposite direction, giving one of the perpetrators who happened to be present, Gavrilo Princip, the perfect opportunity to strike. From there, Princip fatally shot Ferdinand and his wife, ultimately doing just enough to tip tensions over the edge to begin World War I. There have allegedly been even more deaths involving this notorious limo, including those of a Yugoslavian government official and a German captain who both died in car crashes, though their validity is disputed. Today, the Graf and Stift limo is on display at the Austrian Military Museum and is still considered to be one of the most cursed automobiles in history. It's likely you may have stumbled across this incredibly disturbing painting once or twice during your time on the internet. And although it surely is nightmare fuel, the message behind it is equally as intense as its blood-curdling appearance. Published in 1999, the painting is titled I Can't Be a Bride Anymore by Yuko Tatsushima, a Japanese painter who has received critical acclaim for her collection of macabre artworks which focus on the societal griefs and struggles of women. This painting in particular is most notable for being a harrowing depiction of the anguish and trauma endured not only by Tatsushima in her past, but by other Japanese women who have fallen victim to the country's stigmatization of premarital sex, regardless of consent, throughout Japan's history. Women who had sexual relations before marriage were deemed impure and never desired. And even victims of sexual assaults have been frowned upon and led to believe such traumatizing events were their own fault. Of course, this blame has caused countless women to suffer through indescribable misery and shame, as well as forced them to live with their trauma entirely isolated. This experience encapsulated in the bloodied and ragged female figure's appearance in the artwork. Tatsushima's painting has also been the subject of recent internet virality, which all but disregards its initial message, as it has since been associated with the allegedly cursed Japanese poem by Sajo Yaso, Tomino's Hell. In 1965, the couple of Hetty and Douglas Fredrickson purchased a 3-story home at the corner of Williams Street North and Portage Avenue in Chilliwack, British Columbia. While the couple moved in with the intent of living a long and unassuming life, they unknowingly set foot into the most haunted house in the area, and the pair would soon start to see this for themselves. According to the couple, a majority of the paranormal activity came from one upstairs bedroom where drawers opened and shut themselves. A heavy bed frame moved on its own, and footsteps could be heard with no one inside. Neighbors told stories of tragic deaths, which took place in the Fredrickson household, including one of a man who committed suicide at the home in 1956, and another of a woman who was murdered and had her remains cemented in the chimney. Soon, Hetty began to do research on the home herself, and eventually discovered a hidden door which led to a small turret room in the home. There, Hetty allegedly saw an inexplicable mist which smelled like perfume, and had a dream about a ghost on the very same night, leading her to paint this portrait depicting what she saw. The couple ultimately moved out when hundreds of unwelcome visitors, who heard about the hauntings from local newspaper reports, began approaching them, at one point even breaking the home's front steps. A few more families moved in, a majority of whom also stated the house had a rather ominous atmosphere, and the home eventually burned down in 1975 following the explosion of a hot water tank. The 99-door mansion, also known as the Caledonia House, is an abandoned colonial-era mansion located on the Malaysian island of Penang. It is a manor rich with history and supernatural lore, first being constructed in the 1840s by the wealthy British family of the Ramsdens. The building was used as a sugar plantation and a rubber estate in its earliest years, further consisting of a dance hall as well as 10 rooms with 5 to 6 doors in each, which earned the manor the moniker of the 99-door mansion. During World War II, the building was the headquarters of the Japanese army as they occupied Malaya, before they moved out 3 years after the war ended, and John St. Maur Ramsden, the eldest son of the manor's owner, made his return. In June of 1948, the Caledonia House witnessed its darkest scandal, when Ramsden was fatally shot twice in his head by an unknown perpetrator. A lengthy murder case then unfolded, resulting in numerous arrests, court trials, and rumors regarding political hits and jealous competition. But there is still no official suspect for Ramsden's death. The house saw several other owners before being abandoned in the 1960s. Today, locals claim to hear ghastly screams from within, and some say a Bomo, a Malay shaman, has since opened the mansion's 100th door, which is the gateway to the paranormal realm. The Great Bed of Ware is the name of a wooden 4-poster bed initially housed in Ware, England's White Hart Inn, and is now located at London's Victoria and Albert Museum. The bed is over 3 meters tall and wide, and is capable of comfortably holding at least 8 people at once. Of course, a bed this large will draw attention regardless, but the Great Bed of Ware is still associated with an alleged curse. According to one tale, a royal carpenter named Jonas Fosbrook made the bed in 1463 for England's king, and while doing so, placed a curse which would harm any individual who sleeps on it and is not part of a regal lineage. Now, this legend is factually false, as the bed was actually manufactured circa 1590, and Fosbrook was just a Ware innkeeper who came up with the paranormal curse to attract more tourists. This is an abnormal bed regardless though, and one I'd probably have the best sleep in. The Karun Treasure, a collection of 363 Lydian artifacts, altogether known as the Lydian Hoard, is one of the most valuable collection of relics in the world, and has been the subject of numerous legal battles as well as alleged curses. The artifacts date back as early as the 7th century BCE and made news in modern times when they were involved in a scandal between the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art and Turkey in 1987. Turkey stated items from the hoard were stolen from the nation, and though they were returned in 1993, one golden hippocamp brooch was stolen once more 13 years later and replaced with a replica. Authorities eventually learned the thieves were a team led by a former director of the Uşak Museum of Archaeology named Kazim Akbi Kolo, who sold several pieces in order to repay gambling debts, a misfortune he blamed on an ancient curse involving the hoard. According to Akbi Kolo, as well as Uşak locals, those who have illegally excavated the treasures in the past, or have ever stolen or mishandled them, would either die tragic deaths or suffer immense misfortune. Akbi Kolo was sentenced to 13 years in prison in 2006, and today, the Lydian hoard is displayed with heavy security at the Uşak Museum. Mi Novia, or My Girlfriend in English, is a painting created by 19th century Filipino artist Juan Luna circa 1885. On the surface, the artwork appears innocent and even charming, but make no mistake, it has one of the more disturbing backgrounds on this iceberg, which eventually led to the development of an associated curse. Although the subject of the painting was actually based on Mademoiselle Angela Duché, it was initially made for Luna's wife Paspado de Tavera, and was even named after her at one point. You would think an artist who dedicated a painting to his wife would have a loving and long-lasting relationship with her, but that's not this couple, not at all. Years after the painting was published, Luna was growing suspicious of Paz, who he believed was having an affair with a man named Musir Dusak. Instead of confronting his wife, Luna went on to fatally shoot her and her mother-in-law on September 2nd, 1892 as a result. Luna was subsequently arrested, forced to pay a fine to Paz's family, and charged with murder. Though Luna was ultimately freed on February 8, 1893, when authorities relabeled the incident as a crime of passion due to temporary insanity. As unbelievable as it is, Filipino men were often forgiven for killing their presumably unfaithful wives during this time. Today, Luna's painting is often associated with a century-old curse, as it is believed Paz's soul has inhabited the painting and brings misfortune to whoever owns it. Arshau Gorky, an Armenian-American painter who is widely considered to be one of the most influential of the 20th century, has received worldwide critical acclaim for being a pioneer of the abstract expressionism movement, and for his works which encapsulate the suffering experienced by the many victims of the Armenian genocide. Despite his success, however, Gorky's life was one marked by tragedy. He ended his own life via hanging in 1948, and even his paintings are viewed by the superstitious as cursed. given their involvement in a string of unnerving incidents. Those who have visited Gorky's works in galleries reportedly witnessed his paintings suddenly fall, catch on fire, and even a black-haired ghost in a blue overcoat wandering nearby. Most infamously, 15 of Gorky's paintings were aboard American Airlines Flight 1 as it crashed just 2 minutes after takeoff in 1962, claiming the lives of 87 passengers and 8 crew members. Rudolph Valentino's ring makes a strong case for being the most cursed artifact on this iceberg, as it has long been associated with severe misfortune, injury, and death. Of course, the ring's first recorded owner was the Italian silent film star Rudolph Valentino, who purchased the ring at a San Francisco jewelry store in 1920. Valentino was warned of the ring's bad luck by the cashier, but insisted on making the purchase regardless. From there, Valentino starred in The Young Raja, his worst performing film yet, and suffered an attack of appendicitis while wearing the ring, ultimately passing away 2 weeks later. Then Valentino's fiancée, Paula Negri, got hold of the ring and immediately fell under a severe illness. Years later, Negri gave the ring to a man named Russ Colombo, who looked strikingly similar to Valentino, and he was eventually killed in a fatal shooting while wearing the ring. Valentino's cursed ring was essentially leaving behind a path of tragedy, and continued to do so with the likes of an entertainer who died after being run over, his friend who was burglarized, and the thief himself who was fatally shot by police while stealing the ring. Valentino's cursed ring now resides inside a Los Angeles bank vault, owned by the executors of One Del Casino, where it has resided since 1960. The curse itself never died down, however, as the ring has still been involved in the likes of a fire and a $50,000 robbery. The Golden Eagle is the name of a vintage 1964 Dodge 330 limited edition, which has been linked to dozens of alleged deaths. This vehicle was initially used as a police car by the Department of Old Orchard Beach, Maine, but allegedly, the 3 officers who frequently drove it all ended up dying. Not from an accident inside the car, but outside in domestic murder. After being relieved as a police car, the Golden Eagle was then owned by the Allen family, with it still being under the possession of one of its members named Wendy today. Oddly enough, nothing has ever happened to the Allens themselves, but anyone else who made contact with the car, whether by driving or even touching it, would suffer tragic misfortune. One man who visited the Golden Eagle went on to get decapitated by an 18-wheeler, another was struck by lightning, and one was also the victim of a grim murder. As the Golden Eagle's curse grew in notoriety, a local religious group purchased the car from Wendy only to tear it apart and send the pieces to several junkyards in order to put an end to what they thought was a demonic curse. Over time, however, Wendy, who was a self-proclaimed witch and had grown fond of her family car, gradually retrieved every piece of the Golden Eagle and put the car back together. Wendy has kept the Golden Eagle hidden ever since, still maintaining its reputation as the most murderous vehicle in America. On the night of December 11th, 2002, the police department in the English city of Surrey received dozens of calls from locals who stated a car had just swerved off the A3 and crashed off the side of a highway near Burpham, Guildford. Immediately, police arrived at the scene and thoroughly searched the area of the accident, but initially found nothing. As police went 20 meters down the road, however, they then discovered a wrecked maroon Vauxhall Astra hidden in a ditch. Within the wreckage was the body of 21-year-old Christopher Brian Chandler, a robber who had been on the run from Metropolitan Police since July of the same year. Contrary to what authorities believed, however, this was not the wreckage locals had reported. As a matter of fact, further autopsies revealed Chandler had been dead for at least 5 months before the police's discovery. So a new question arose. Why did Surrey police suddenly receive a flood of calls about a car accident when the only one to take place in the area occurred over 5 months prior? Authorities insist this mystery is entirely grounded, but the superstitious believe what Surrey locals witnessed was a ghostly replay of the very same incident. There are still no definitive answers for this occurrence today, and what locals witnessed on that December night is anyone's guess. And ladies and gentlemen, that does it for the world of the paranormal iceberg. I hope you learned something new today. This has been Zen. Take care.